Hey, listeners, if you haven't registered for the National Homebrewers Conference yet, head on over to homebrewcon.org and get signed up. HomebrewCon is the biggest gathering of the homebrew faithful, and it's simply too much fun to be missed. Register at homebrewcon.org today for 3 unforgettable days of seminars and nightly events. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, April 21st, 2016. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, it's all about brewing sour beers on purpose. It's the sour brewing panel that I moderated at the New Zealand Homebrewers Conference in Nelson. We'll hear from both the homebrew and professional perspective. If you're new to homebrewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And if you buy any of our DVD combos, you get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener. And don't forget to get a copy of our Brewer's Logbook. You can use it to log and track up to 50 batches of beer. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. And on the Facebook front, I used to have basicbrewing.james as a username, but they've started verifying identities. And since I don't have a driver's license or a passport with Basic Brewing as my first name, I'm not sure what the status of that account is going to be. So be sure to, if you've friended me on the Basic Brewing James account on Facebook, go on over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/basicbrewing and like that page, and you can message me on there as well. You can get a hold of me on Twitter as well. And the web, email works too, james@basicbrewing.com. Anyway, thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link at our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon shopping, think of us first. Click on our associate link. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own Magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry Podcast Directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. And if you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. Thanks to everybody who's done so already. And that is handy if, for instance, you live outside the United States and, products are way expensive to ship. You can support the show by using that link. That's where that came from, in fact. I think a listener suggested that. Let's take a look into the mailbag, shall we? Chris from Michigan writes, "For me, there is a near juxtaposition of the topics of brewing in a bag and decoction. I've done decoction once as a result of not having a big enough mashing vessel for a big beer I wanted to make. I've also done brew in a bag once with disastrous results." Chris says we didn't think about keeping the bag off the bottom of the kettle and decided not to drink anything with melted nylon in it. Probably a good thing. Chris says, "I'm wondering about the problems of attempting to combine these practices. It seems that the mash in a brew-in-a-bag session would be too thin for decoction, though I would, of course, be able to strain out the grains easily enough. I wonder if the thin mash would cause the effects of decoction to disappear." Interesting. Well, Chris, I don't think there would be any problem at all with combining brew-in-a-bag and decoction. In decoction, you're taking a part of the mash away from the mash tun and heating it up to a boil in a separate pot, separate from the main mash and separate from the mash tun. So no worries there about melting your nylon bag. You don't have to apply heat to the bottom of your kettle when you're doing a decoction. It's just like if you were doing a decoction from a cooler mash tun or something like that. And as far as mash thickness, you could make the mash as thick or thin as you like. Just treat your bag-lined kettle as you would a regular mash tun. And, add as much or as little water as you want in that main mash. Then after your decoction process and your saccharification rest is complete, then you can add the remainder of the water to the mash before removing the bag, or you can heat up the remainder of the water, or not if you listen to the latest Brewlosophy episode that we did. Heat up the remainder of the water in a separate pot and sparge your grain in the bag in there. So, I think a decoction mash using brew in a bag would be fairly straightforward. You just got to kind of follow the rules of decoction and just think of your kettle with the bag lining it as a regular mash tun. And I don't think you'd have any issues there. In fact, if you look up our video episode in the archives where Steve and I brew a Pilsner using organic homegrown cornmeal, Steve does a cereal mash in the kitchen, and we combine that in the main mash using brew in a bag. So not exactly the same as decoction, but along those same lines. Appreciate the question, Chris. If you out there have done brew in a bag, decoction, let me know how it turned out and if your process is different from mine. You know what system would be perfect for doing a brew in a bag decoction mash? An electric brew in a bag system from our sponsors, High Gravity in Tulsa. You saw that coming, didn't you? You could do an initial dough in at a low rest temperature, as you do with decoction. Collect a third of your mash after that initial rest and take that away to a separate vessel to boil. And then while you're doing that, your high-gravity electric system would be keeping your mash rock steady at that initial temperature with the EBC SV electronic controller and with the accompanying recirculating pump. So that's a challenge, if you don't have a heated mash tun, with just a cooler. While you've taken that decoction away and you are boiling it, your mash temperature's falling. Not with the high-gravity electric brewing system. Let's say after you boil your decoction and you add it back to the main mash, and and this has happened to me, you've miscalculated and you undershot your mash temperature for your decoction. No worries. Just dial up the higher temperature on the EBC SV controller and let it automatically raise the heat to the sweet spot that you're looking for. And then after your saccharification rest and after all the mash is done, then you can add your sparge water and let it recirculate through the mash with the pump to complete the mashing process. Then remove the bag and the grain and get on with your brew day. So with a little bit of imagination, you can see that the high-gravity electric brew in a bag systems are very versatile. You can check out all of the electric brewing systems that High Gravity offers at highdgravitybrew.com, and you can see videos of Steve Wilkes and me demonstrating those systems at youtube.com/highdgravitybrew. But the main website is highdgravitybrew.com, and thanks again to Desiree and Dave for their continuing support. I was honored to be asked by the organizers of the New Zealand Homebrewers Conference to moderate a couple of the panels while I was down there. I was very happy to do it. This panel on sour beers or brewing sour beers was fun because we got to hear from a wide range of opinions and techniques from both the homebrewing side and the professional side. You'll hear David Nichols from MOA, Soren Eriksson from 8 Wired, Chris Colby of beerandwinejournal.com, and our buddy Will Glaspie from 32 North.
Okay, here we have sour panel experts. We have David Nichols from MOA, Soren Eriksson from 8 Wired. We have Chris Colby from beerandwinejournal.com, and Will Glaspie from 32 North in San Diego, California. And at some point we have a microphone around here. Here it comes. Carl's got the microphone. We're going to talk about brewing sour beers on purpose. I guess we all might have brewed a sour beer not on purpose at one point. So first of all, let's get in. We're on a fairly abbreviated schedule. But if we can go down the line and kind of use the microphone and give us a brief description of your background in sour brewing, how you got started, and where you are in the program and such as that.
My background starts 30 odd years ago commercially brewing, and 20 years of that was preventing sour beers, and I think I was reasonably successful at that. We started our sour program at Moa in 2008, small scale, and now it's in the order of up to 10,000 litres a year, so it's getting quite big.
At 8Y Brewing, we started brewing sour beers in 2011, was the first sour beer we made. We now have 225 wine barrels, ex-wine barrels, full of sour beer, and 7 large-scale fruiters. So we have a fair bit of sour beer in production, and not a hell of a lot of that has been bottled yet. It's just a matter of finding time to put it in bottle. But yeah, there's a lot of beer there, lots of different beers. So yeah, hopefully share some knowledge from that.
Yeah, I'm just a home brewer. I've brewed many batches of sour beer, including straight lambics, fruit lambics. I also, for a few years, had a sort of bucket farm of lambics, and I brewed, 1 year I was able to blend 3-year-old, 2-year-old, and 1-year-old lambic into a sort of imitation of a goose style lambic, and I've done some other crazy things like try to interpret some historical beers and do wild fermentations. And so my experience is all at the homebrewing scale.
So I've been a professional brewer since 2006. During the time, I certainly have played around a little bit with sour beers at home. Made a pretty nice one with some bacteria that came from some peach skins and just kind of a couple of other little experiments. And then this year, I started working at the 32 North Brewing Company in San Diego, California, which is kind of an interesting case because we make a Berliner Weiss that is actually our principal product. It is the one we sell the most of, and we're always making it. So it's not a special release or a one-off for us. It's not a barrel-aged beer. It is a beer that we are under pressure to create year-round and on a continuous basis.
Let's start maybe at the beginning. Let's talk about recipe development and wort production, recipe design. What do you find are the optimum factors to keep in mind when you are developing a recipe for a sour beer? Is there a comfort zone that you find is the best for sour beer production in that area?
I just model most of mine on Belgian lambics, a wheat beer base, anywhere from 50-50 barley malt, wheat malt, sometimes some unmalted wheat, to sometimes higher, maybe 65-35. So all mine are just basically taking the Belgian lambic model and then incorporating other elements.
We make a large range of different sour beers, and in theory, any of those beers could have been made into a normal beer, based on the malt bill at least. Usually we don't add any hops at all on the hot side. Every now and then we dry hop the barrels before blending and bottling. But yeah, in terms of malt, the beers are all pretty standard. It could have been pale ale or stout or red ale sorts. I generally try and limit too many heavily accurate malts like roast barley. I probably wouldn't use, not a lot anyways. If I wanted to make a dark beer, I would use a clarified dehusked thing, just because once the microbes get to work, I think that level of accurateness just elevates, becomes a bit unpalatable. Also, obviously, the beer will generally ferment down to 0, so you don't have any residual sugar to balance those harsh those flavors out. For the same reason, I'll try and limit the amount of crystal malts that we have in there. And generally, if we make a darker one, I'll color it with dehusked roasted malt. Not to say that we don't use any crystal malts or anything like that at all, though we do, and malts and so forth. But yeah, just try and keep an eye on it. modify the recipe accordingly.
Our program's been based around wheat beer, based, a little bit of unmalted wheat. This year is the first year I've sort of branched out into sort of pale ale base or a dark beer base. And yeah, they're work in progress at the moment.
Yeah, when I think about a recipe I want for any style of beer, the first thing I do is I go and drink beers that are of that style. So if you want to make a brewing or a Flanders Red or a Lambic, go out and drink every one you can get your hands on. That'll give you a great idea for what that wild yeast or what that bacteria is going to do during fermentation. And then I just kind of treat it the same way I would treat any other beer. I kind of try to get to know that yeast and think about the flavors it's going to make and the kind of malt profile it's going to leave behind and the level of dryness. And then I just make a recipe that I think will taste nice after it's gone through that process, just like you would with a Belgian yeast or an ale yeast. Once you know how that yeast behaves, just think about what you'd like to feed it.
We have some questions from Facebook, I believe, to get us started. Where do you find your source of bugs? Where do you find your microorganisms for fermentation process?
I'm pretty lucky the brewery's right amongst the vineyards in Marlborough, so there's a ready source there. I've done quite a bit with different wild yeasts on grapes and propagating those, utilising those in our cultures. Barrels, great source for us, and then also the Y yeast smackbacks. But over time, I've morphed our sort of house blender bugs for our lambic styles, and then sort of tweaking it each year, looking, especially under the microscope, as to what the profile looks like, and keeping that as a record, photographs, for instance, of those slides, so I can sort of see approximate percentages. In the last year or so, I've got an invisible sentinel, which is a nice little bit of high-tech gear, and I can do both lactic and Brettanomyces counts. It's approximate counts, but it gives me sort of approximate balances of lactic to Brett on our kit.
Yeah, we get a lot of bugs from the wine barrel as well. As I said, they're all ex-wine barrels, so wineries are pretty filthy, and they will have a lot of stuff in the liquid that will ferment the beer as well. So yeah, we don't. I mean, we clean the barrels when we get them, but we don't try and sterilize them in any way. Just sort of hose them out with the hot water just to get most of the crap out of there, and then obviously in the wood all the microbes are still sitting. But that said, though, we still add pediococcus and Brettanomyces that we get from labs to the barrel, just to ensure that we have enough of those kind of things to make the beer sour and make it taste good.
Yeah, both White Labs and Y Yeast produce both lambic blends, sour beer blends, and the individual microorganisms I use most in culture. I've done one spontaneous ferment. I know in a practice that a lot of American homebrewers seem to love is taking the dregs out of sour beer bottles and pouring that into there. I sort of think that's useless. You have no idea after the beer's been fermented out and segmented out and where it's sat. You have no idea what's left in that bottle. And certainly, if you have a bottle of beer, sour beer you really like pouring the dregs of that bottle in your fermentation is not going to turn your beer into that beer. It's it might not be bad, but it's just, to me, it's just you're sort of just adding some unknown microbiological blend of stuff. So I tend to stick to the commercial cultures because I know what I'm adding to my beer and I can control that and I can replicate it if I want. If I end up pouring the dregs of some beer into it and it turned fantastic, there's no way I can replicate that ever again. So I pretty much stick to commercial cultures.
Yeah, I've played with making sour beers with microbes derived from a variety of sources, but at 32 North, obviously, we want to make a very consistent product with relatively clean sourness. And so we did purchase culture of lactobacillus from White Labs that we've kind of managed to keep going. Turns out it looks like we're going to probably be able to replenish that about once every 6 months and keep it working and get a relatively consistent result that way. I have played around with bottle dregs, and Chris is right. It's not going to turn your beer into whatever beer was in that bottle, certainly. But it can, I feel like, in my experience, it can lend some kind of interesting complexities, especially if you maybe pitch it a little further along in the process. I would say a big caveat there is you need to make sure you have a relatively fresh bottle. I wouldn't do it with, a 5 or 10-year-old bottle of something, but if there's a locally produced sour beer that you can get a pretty fresh sample of, there may be some value to doing that. It is, as he said, very unpredictable. So, I think if you're just starting to make sour beers as a home brewer, you want to give yourself the best chance for success possible and eliminate as many variables as possible. And I think starting with purchased cultures is probably a really good step in that direction. You at least know what you're working with. You can look it up on the internet and get some idea of what it's going to do, what other people have had success with. And so I would definitely point you in that direction.
I want to ask David, since you said that you collect organisms from the environment, from the vineyard, give us some hints on how we might do that ourselves. How do you do it, and what's the key? Because I had a fig tree for a while, and I tried by putting one of my figs into a starter, and I just got scary things. I don't think it was nothing I wanted to put in my mouth. So what's your strategy?
Strategy, look for the nankiest bunches that I can find. Grow those into a about 20-litre sample of wood, and then start extracting and start looking at what's in there that you can isolate.
So you're actually using a microscope to look at the... Okay.
Yeah, microscope and plating. I do it with both grapes, cherries. I'm currently doing some with peaches at the moment. Just seeing what happens. But the grapes and the cherries are the two main ones.
How do you know when you've got good bugs? What's a good bug look like? They wave. Hi, friendly.
Usually I'm looking for yeast. So yeast is pretty obvious under the microscope. And I'm looking for different yeast. So the one that I've had success with, or the most success with, is a really, really small yeast cell. And my theory is, hey, this guy's going to be able to ferment to quite a high alcohol content. Because just empirically, all the high alcohol producing yeasts tend to be quite small.
So there's a question also from Facebook. How do you maintain a consistent house culture? How do you keep your microorganisms in the positive zone?
As I mentioned before, for me, it's microscope, checking it all the time. Well, not all the time, but just knowing what it looks like, what the range of microorganisms in there are, and an approximate sort of ratio. Taking notes, taking photos, and I'll tweak it with commercial blends, but I won't replace. I'm keeping the same culture, and I think it's part of almost the terroir, use the winemaker term of what the sour profiles that we're doing are.
Yeah, we don't do anything like that at all. we just go with whatever it is, and at the end we'll blend it to be something that we want it to be. But I mean, out of our 200 barrels, all of them are different. Even though 10 of them would have been from the same batch, so maybe 10 would be the same batch. Each barrel is different because it ferments differently. There's different bugs in there and so forth. And we pretty much just go with that. We're not trying to make batch brewed sour beer, so to say. I mean, every bottling run we do will be a blend of several barrels that are probably not from the same batch. There will be different things, just because that's the blend that tastes the best. When the barrel is empty, again, we'll hose it out, not sterilize it in any way, but clean it out with some warm water. And then just put the next beer in there. So whatever was in that barrel is now going to grow again.
Can you do that on a homebrew level, do you think, though? Like, is that possible to take to my sheep and do as well?
Well, the problem there is that unless you've got 200 ferments going on, then you don't have, you don't need 200, but unless you've got, say, maybe 10, you don't have enough to actually blend from and just let it go. you probably want to have a bit more control because obviously it takes years to make this kind of beer, and you don't want to be stuck at the end of it with something that you can't use for anything. Whereas, unless one of our barrels goes really funky, we have a couple of barrels that were beyond repair. Somehow we'll usually find a home for them in a blend.
Can be a cheese one.
Yeah, but you've clearly been in our brewery. Yeah, we had a barrel that smelled just like really bad Parmesan cheese, like really manky stuff. We were pretty convinced we were convinced that eventually that barrel would clear up. It never did, so now it's living out in the yard. It got expelled from the brewery.
The barrels make good planters.
They do, absolutely. The other thing will obviously would be if you're going to get barrels with a lot of acetobacter, if the beer starts doing its vinegar, we'll expel those as well. But other than that, so far, we haven't had any barrels that I don't think we can use for anything.
Now, Chris, you've actually done some blending on the homebrew level, haven't you?
Yeah, but in terms of maintaining a house culture, I let the fine folks at White Labs and White's do that for all me. I did enough culturing crap in graduate school, and I know how much work that is, and I'd much rather just go to the homebrew store and buy it. So I didn't do much home culturing. I've done blending, but that's like it for.
Well, talk about your blending strategy. I mean, on a small scale, how does it work?
Well, my first blending strategy was the absolute dumbest strategy possible. I 1 year I ended up with a bucket of lambic that was 3 years old, one was 2 years old, and one was 1 year old, and I knew that's the blend that went into Belgian lambic, so I just poured them all together, and then it turned out good. It actually won Best of Show at my local homebrew contest, but I later learned that the Belgians are a little more sophisticated to that, and they taste each barrel and come up with a blend that's usually based on, they usually take the 3 year lambic, which is the most intensely sour and the driest, and then they fill in spaces with the 2 year old and the 1 year old. The 1 year old is going to be still maybe a little bit of residual sweetness, and fill in that, and then use the 2 year old to bring up and down the level of funk or whatever, because they're going to progressively get more funky potentially towards the end. But there's a lot of variability, and also on a home scale, a lot of variability in how an individual bucket full of lambic turns out, because you have all these multiple organisms, and you're expecting you're expecting the Saccharomyces to quickly ferment the beer like it normally does, then you're expecting the Brettanomyces to start growing slowly, and the Pediococcus and the lambic, or the Lactobacillus, to start growing slow, and it's just, that doesn't happen like clockwork. So you get some variability, and these days, if I had a lambic farm like I did right now, and hopefully 4 years from now I'll have another one, I'll be a little bit better about trying to taste them all and come up with a blend, other than just, I've got 15 gallons of beer, here's 50 gallons of lambic.
Will, anything to add?
Sure, yeah. So when I first came on to 32 North, how to maintain our lactobacillus culture was a big question that I had. That's not something I've ever had to do before. But as I said, we make a lot of this beer, and I talked to a few people when I first started and kind of settled on a regime of just, keeping it working, just like you would brewer's yeast, essentially. We make a batch with it. We make a kettle sour. Sorry, whoever made that T-shirt. But it's a Berliner Weiss, so it's supposed to have a fairly straightforward flavor. So yeah, we make a kettle sour, and then before we move it out of the kettle, we save some of the beer. We found that the lactobacillus doesn't sediment very well like a brewer's yeast does, so we actually just kind of agitate it, and as we're transferring it, we just save a percentage of the batch. And at some point within the next 2 weeks, we make sure to get that into the next batch. And that strategy has served us very well.
Does everybody think kettle souring is a bad idea? Besides Will?
I think it depends on the beer, honestly.
I think it's a great idea. We do a few as well. It's a very good way to make a very clean and predictable sourness. When you put beer in a barrel or do any kind of wild fermentation, you don't really know what's going to come out the other end. And inevitably, that product will be risky and therefore also very expensive. But kettle sour is very easy to do, very predictable. It doesn't take a lot more work, so you can sort of get out more sour beer than you otherwise could and reach more people, I guess.
And kettle souring and sour mashing is something that you can easily do on the homebrew scale. I've done it myself using uncrushed two-row or pale malt to inoculate wort. Once it's cooled down to, you collect your wort from the mash, cool it down to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what what's the sweet spot for lactobacillus in centigrade? 30.
We do ours just below 50, so 48.
Okay. Well, so within a range of temperatures, you can. But once it's down to that level, if you want to do the cheap and easy way, you can just soak some unmalted or unmilled base malt in there for just a half an hour or so, and find a way to maintain that wort at that sweet spot temperature for a couple, 3 days. And I have an electric smoker that looks like a cabinet. And so I do small sour batches, and I put my wort into glass jugs that are filled up all the way to the top, put airlocks on them, and let them sour in that. And the beauty about kettle souring is then you boil the wort, and then you pitch normal saccharin beer yeast, and you don't have to worry about souring your fermentation chambers and things like that. Anything else to add along those lines, David?
Well, I don't kettle sour or mash sour. I hate it. So our Berliner Weiss, I go through a lactic ferment in the fermenter. That's why it's at 30 degrees, maintained at 30. Monitor pH, and then pitch either Kolsch or usually for the Berliner Weiss, Kolsch yeast, and aerate in the fermenter, and it seems to work. Well, I think it works.
Let's talk about fermentation strategy. I mean, what are the different strategies that you use to ferment sour beers?
Well, for ours, we're both fermenting in stainless and in barrels, and we'll even the stainless ferments are long, slow ferments. The 2015 Cherry and South Blanc was started beginning of December, and they're still in the original fermenter. They'll be transferred into barrel probably in about 3 months as things cool down a little. And yeah, it's long and slow, whether it's in barrel or stainless.
Doesn't that mean expensive then? Because tying up resource?
Yeah. It's
But
expensive.
they're being sold as much more expensive beers, though, are they? Not packaged.
They're sold as a premium.
Yeah.
Ours are typically retail around $10, $12 a bottle for our sours. I think yours are more expensive again, sorry. So you're reflecting the time and the effort and the price, that's for sure. I think that's fair. Why do I go into stainless? Really size and scale that we're doing it on now. And barrels, to be honest, are a pain in the ass to deal with. There are a lot of manual handling. And the good thing about them is you can isolate. You're dealing with 200 litre batches, so you've got a lot of opportunity to blend. So I'll always have barrels, but with the bulk of it going, well, about 50% is in stainless. It just gives me more flexibility.
While our kettle sours obviously are fermented in stains, just like any other normal beer. All the funky sours will eventually go into wood. Sometimes you ferment them up first in stainless. Other times you ferment the whole thing in the barrel. Mainly just for practical reasons. You don't have to tie up the stainless for 2 months for a long ferment. I think it's good though to do the primary ferment in a vessel that you can kind of rack the beer out of and leave much of the crap behind, so that doesn't get into the barrel for long-term aging. So yeah, that's probably the ideal way to do it. You can either start out with a normal clean yeast for the primary ferment and then pitch your box, or you can pitch your box up front with a normal Saccharomyces yeast. Either way works really. I guess if you co-ferment from the beginning, the process is faster because bacteria has got more room to play, so to say. There's no alcohol in that yet, so they can grow faster. But that said, though, I mean, the Saccharomyces takes over very fast, so within probably 12 hours, the bacteria are completed anyways.
Yeah, at home scale, I do everything in buckets. Just buckets aren't expensive. They breathe a little bit. There's some controversy among American sour beer brewers right now that they say that there's more oxygen coming in a bucket than there is a barrel, but then they make the leap of faith to say that that's bad and you shouldn't do it, despite the fact that people have done it year in year out and it works just fine. So, my wife is very patient with me, but if she would come home one day and find stacked 55 gallon barrels in our living room, she would be mad. Where she's quite happy to let me have a little bucket farm in the back room. So buckets are inexpensive, and then my fermentation is basically, again, I try to brew things that resemble Belgian lambics, so I try to follow that idea. My very first ones, I would pitch the brewer's yeast first, and then I would start pitching the individual organisms later. Later on, like I said, both white labs and white yeast make blends, and I found out pitching those, I got comparable results and with just less fiddling, and so I went to that.
Yeah, I guess the main advice I would give on fermentation, for all sour or wild beers, is just to understand it's going to progress differently than a straight Saccharomyces fermentation. It's going to require a lot more patience. You got to maybe kind of put on your winemaker hat for a minute there, and just go visit that batch every week or two and taste it. My strategy has always been, I taste the beer as it's aging, and I kind of try to observe, is it improving? Is it kind of declining in flavor? Sometimes, it can develop a strange flavor, but then that flavor goes away and then it improves over time. And really, when the beer is at a point where the flavor hasn't changed significantly in about 2 months, and you like the flavor, then it's pretty much done. With regards to our Berliner Weiss, I should probably specify. So we do a kettle sour, but we're basically just using the kettle as an incubator. We don't actually pasteurize it on the way out. We do, at that point, bring it into the fermenter. It only gets lactobacillus for the first 4 days that it sits in the kettle. We basically leave it over the weekend. Then we pitch another yeast, on the Saccharomyces yeast, on top of it, where that's really where the bulk of the alcohol comes from, is that fermentation. And because of the low pH, that fermentation also progresses a little more slowly than a normal Saccharomyces fermentation would. It varies, and that is definitely something I would say about making these beers. No matter how much you try to control it, they're going to wander on you a little bit. Typically, at the point that we're bringing it out of the kettle, the pH is somewhere around 3. Sometimes it's in the high 2s. Sometimes it's in the somewhere around 3.1, 3.2. But it's typically around 3. We found in San Diego that customers responded really well to a very sour beer, and that kind of light, delicate Berliner Weiss that I kind of like a little more, was just not what was selling quite as well. So we make a nice tart one. Anyway, at that point we carry out the Saccharomyces fermentation, and at that point it's relatively stable and package it.
Is there a reason that you don't transfer it into the fermenter and hold it in the fermenter for those 4 days and then put the Saccharomyces on?
Yes, and the reason for that is because we found that we really have to keep it right at around 40 C to get the sourness we're looking for. I tried initially. I was a little nervous about leaving our kettle on over the weekend, right? And didn't really want to do that. And so I would get a pitch temperature that I liked, and then I would just leave the kettle off. And I found we really were not getting very much sourness that way. But when I did leave the kettle on over the weekend, that flavor developed a lot more quickly. So that's really the reason we hold it in the kettle. It's essentially we're using it as an incubator.
We have time for maybe a couple questions from the audience. James. Okay, go ahead.
One really tiny nitty-gritty detail, if you're doing it at home, once you have a little bucket farm or farm of fermenters, be sure to check on the airlocks frequently. If you're not a commercial brewer and you don't have a whole bunch of things, it can be really easy to forget. A couple months go by and your airlocks can dry out, and then you're going to get more acetobacter than you want.
Okay, maybe we have time for like 1-2 questions, Carl.
When you're doing kettle sours and you want to do like a hoppy sour, and you're pasteurising it on the way out, would you do your late additions on the sort of second round boil or on the first time?
Yeah, so all our kettle sours are quite highly hopped. We add almost no hops at all on the hot side, because I think the bitterness clashes with the sourness. So we add a small amount of hops from the whirlpool, mainly just to get a little bit of that sort of hot side, hot flavor, so to say, and then we dry hop it heavily. So our Berliner-Weisse, for example, which is not traditional at all, is pretty much hopped like an IPA if you look at the total amount of hops in that, but probably only about 15% of that goes into the kettle, the rest is dry.
Have you calculated the IBUs on that?
No, but it would be low. It would be 10, something like that.
Yeah, if your bottle conditioning is a 2-year-old sour, are you re-yeasting them, or is there enough?
We do, yes. Yeah, just as a precaution. I'm sure that they would eventually carbonate themselves with the stuff that's in there, but we add champagne yeast just to make sure that we have enough live cells to do the secondary fermentation.
Okay. All right, Carl. We're not too far off the mark here. Thanks everybody for the information. Thanks everybody for your questions and your attention.
Thanks again to David, Soren, Chris, and Will. And of course, thanks to the NZHC organizers for having us down. Still more stuff to come in the future from Nelson. Got a bunch of stuff down there. In the meantime, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can find our logbooks, too, where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer. Check all of those out at basicbrewingshop.com. And thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Star Wars Dual Alarm Clock. Star Wars Dual Alarm Clock Speaker System. So, the Force awakens you, I guess. And Repel Lemon Eucalyptus Natural Insect Repellent 4-ounce pump spray. We need that around here. I killed my first mosquito yesterday. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on our Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. And don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.